$590 billion, 183,000 workers, 3,400 tons of gold, 7 years of construction. And not a single hammer was heard on site. 3,000 years ago, King Solomon built what may be the most expensive structure in human history. More costly than the International Space Station, more valuable than the world's tallest skyscrapers combined. A building so drenched in gold that sunlight reflecting off its walls could blind you from a mile away. But here's what they don't tell you in Sunday school. This project nearly bankrupted his kingdom. And the way they built it, in complete silence, engineers today still can't fully explain. This is the untold story of Solomon's Temple. To understand what Solomon was about to attempt, you need to understand what came before. For over 400 years, God's presence among the Israelites dwelled in a tent, the tabernacle, portable, temporary, designed for a wandering people. But by 1000 BC, Israel was no longer wandering. King David had united the tribes, conquered Jerusalem, and established an empire. And David had a dream. He wanted to build God a permanent house, a temple worthy of the creator of the universe. There was just one problem. God said no. Not to the temple, to David. 2 Samuel chapter 7 records the moment. David is told, "You are not the one to build me a house. You have shed much blood and fought many wars." David was a warrior. His hands had taken lives. The temple, the house of peace, required a man of peace. That man would be his son, Solomon. The name itself comes from shalom, the Hebrew word for peace. 1 Chronicles calls him a man of rest, born not to conquer, but to consolidate, not to fight, but to build. When David died, he left Solomon with a mission and the means to accomplish it. But the challenges ahead were staggering. Where do you find 3,400 tons of gold in the ancient world? How do you transport massive cedar logs over 200 miles across sea and mountain? How do you coordinate 183,000 workers without modern communication? And how do you construct the most complex building of the ancient world without making a sound? The answers begin with a dying king and a room full of gold. Picture David in his final years, not on a battlefield, not on a throne, in a treasury room. The hands that killed Goliath now grip a counting stylus. The eyes that once scanned enemy formations now trace columns of inventory scrolls. Talent by talent, shekel by shekel, every ounce accounted for. What most people don't realize is that David spent decades preparing for a building he would never see completed. 1 Chronicles chapter 22 reveals the scale of his obsession. From the national treasury, built from war spoils, conquered tribute, and international trade, David set aside 100,000 talents of gold and 1,000,000 talents of silver. But that wasn't enough. From his personal fortune, he added another 3,000 talents of gold, specifically Ophir gold, the finest in the ancient world, and 7,000 talents of refined silver. Bronze and iron? The text says they were beyond weighing. Gemstones filled entire storerooms, onyx, turquoise, marble, stones whose names we no longer recognize. Now, let's translate these ancient numbers into terms we can grasp. 1 talent equaled approximately 34 kilograms, about 75 pounds. That means the gold reserves alone totaled 3,400 metric tons. At today's gold price of roughly $4,500 per ounce, that's $493 billion. Add the silver, over 34,000 metric tons, and you're looking at another $80 billion. The combined value? Approximately $590 billion in precious metals alone. For perspective, the International Space Station, humanity's most expensive construction project, cost $150 billion. The Abraj al-Bait clock tower in Mecca, the world's most expensive building, cost $16 billion. Solomon's temple had nearly 40 times that budget, in raw materials, before a single worker was paid. David knew he wouldn't live to see it finished. 1 Chronicles 29 records his final address to the nation, an old man handing over his life's work to his son. "I have taken great pains," he said, "to provide for the temple of the Lord." Great pains. Decades of accumulation. Every conquered kingdom, every tribute payment, every trade negotiation, all flowing toward a single purpose. But $590 billion in gold doesn't build itself. Solomon had inherited the fortune. What he didn't have was the raw materials, the expertise, the trees. For that, he needed to make a deal with the most powerful merchant king in the ancient world. Israel had a problem. Gold they had in abundance, silver overflowed the treasury. But Israel was an agricultural nation. Farmers, shepherds, vintners. They had no timber industry, no master craftsmen, no experience building monumental structures. And for a project of this scale, Solomon needed one material above all others: cedar. Cedar of Lebanon. The premium construction wood of the ancient world, rot-resistant, aromatic, massive in size. Some trees grew over 100 feet tall, with trunks wider than a chariot. It was the steel beam of antiquity, and it grew only in one place, the mountains of Phoenicia, modern-day Lebanon, over 200 miles north of Jerusalem, in territory controlled by King Hiram of Tyre. Tyre was the ancient world's maritime superpower. Phoenician ships dominated Mediterranean trade routes. Their craftsmen were legendary, and Hiram had already supplied cedar to David years earlier. So Solomon sent a message. 1 Kings chapter 5 preserves the diplomatic letter. "You know my father David could not build the temple," Solomon wrote, "because of the wars waged against him from all sides. But now the Lord my God has given me rest. I intend to build." Hiram agreed. But this wasn't charity. This was business. The deal: Israel would provide annual payments of 20,000 cores of wheat, roughly 4,400 tons of grain, plus 20,000 baths of pressed olive oil, around 440,000 liters, every year for 20 years. In exchange, Tyre would supply unlimited cedar and cypress timber, gold supplements, and, most importantly, skilled craftsmen led by a master artisan named Huram Abi, a man of mixed heritage, Israelite mother and Tyrian father, skilled in bronze, gold, silver, iron, stone, wood, and fabric. But getting the materials was only half the challenge. Moving them was the real engineering feat. Feel the salt spray as you stand at Joppa Harbor. Massive cedar rafts, some logs weighing several tons, drift in from the north, floated down the Mediterranean coast. Now turn inland. See those hills shimmering in the heat? Jerusalem sits up there, 800 meters higher, 60 kilometers of rocky, climbing terrain, and every single log had to make that journey. No trucks, no trains, no cranes, just rope, sledges, and human muscle. Solomon had the gold, he had the wood, he had the craftsmen. But who would actually do the building? The answer involved 183,000 people. Let that number settle. 183,000. In a nation of perhaps 1 to 2 million total inhabitants, Solomon conscripted nearly 10% of the entire population for this single project. In modern American terms, that would be like mobilizing 33 million people to build one structure. 1 Kings chapter 5 provides the organizational chart, and it reveals something uncomfortable. The workforce was divided into rigid tiers, and not everyone was treated equally. At the top, 30,000 Israelites assigned to logging operations in Lebanon. These men worked in rotating shifts, 10,000 at a time, 1 month in the mountains, 2 months home with their families. Demanding work, yes, but sustainable, humane even. Below them, 80,000 stonecutters and 70,000 carriers. 150,000 people assigned to the most brutal labor, quarrying rock and hauling it up mountainous terrain. These were not Israelites. They were foreigners, descendants of Canaanite peoples conquered generations earlier. And for them, there was no rotation, no 2 months at home, just endless work under permanent conscription. The Hebrew term is mas, corvée labor, forced service to the state. The Bible records it without editorial comment, but the math is unavoidable. Solomon's temple, the house of the God who liberated Israel from Egyptian slavery, was built substantially by slave labor. Overseeing this vast operation was a man named Adoniram, minister of forced labor. It was not a position that won friends. Years later, after Solomon's death, when the northern tribes demanded relief from the heavy yoke, they demonstrated their rage by stoning Adoniram to death in the street. But there's one more figure in this story worth noting. A young official named Jeroboam, assigned to supervise labor gangs. He saw the system from the inside, the exhaustion, the resentment, the injustice. After Solomon's death, Jeroboam would lead those same northern tribes in rebellion. Their rallying cry, preserved in 1 Kings chapter 12, "Your father made our yoke heavy, lighten it." The temple's construction planted the seeds of the kingdom's destruction. Put yourself in the sandals of one of the 70,000 carriers. No end date, no relief, just endless stone on your back, endless hills to climb. Your grandfather was Canaanite, your father was Canaanite, and now you're spending your life building a temple to the God of your conquerors. What thoughts run through your mind? What prayers or curses do you under your breath? With 183,000 workers swarming the construction site, you'd expect the noise to be deafening. Hammers ringing, chisels cracking, supervisors shouting. But visitors to Jerusalem during those 7 years reported something strange. Silence. Complete silence. How is that even possible? 1 Kings chapter 6, verse 7. One of the strangest verses in the entire Bible. In building the temple, only blocks dressed at the quarry were used, and no hammer, chisel, or any other iron tool was heard at the temple site while it was being built.
We demand an answer now.
No hammer sounds, no chisel sounds, no iron tools at all, on site, for 7 years, on the most ambitious building project of the ancient world. Why would Solomon impose such a bizarre restriction? The answer is theological. In the ancient Israelite worldview, iron meant weapons. Weapons meant war. War meant blood. And blood could not touch the dwelling place of the God of peace. Exodus chapter 20 established the principle. If you use a tool on an altar, you will defile it. Deuteronomy 27 reinforced it. Altar stones must remain uncut. Solomon extended this logic to the entire temple. Every wall, every floor, every threshold. all of it treated as sacred space. The house of peace would be built by peaceful means. Silence wasn't just practical preference, it was worship. But how do you actually construct a massive stone building without any on-site metalwork? The answer is a technique we call prefabrication, and Solomon's engineers executed it at a level that still impresses modern architects. Every single stone was cut to exact specifications at the quarry, miles from the construction site. Measured, shaped, smoothed, finished. Then transported to Jerusalem, already complete. When the stones arrived, workers simply positioned them. No trimming, no adjustment, no modification. Like ancient Lego blocks, each piece had a designated position, and they fit perfectly. The precision required is staggering. Without computers, without laser levels, without standardized measurement tools. Every quarry team had to work from identical blueprints. Every stone had to match millimeter tolerances. One mistake, one block cut too large or too small, and the entire section would be compromised. The primary source for these stones? A massive underground quarry beneath Jerusalem itself, known today as Zedekiah's quarries, or Solomon's quarries. 5 acres of caverns extending 200 meters into the bedrock. The stone extracted there is called meleke, royal stone. It has a remarkable property: soft and easy to cut while underground, but hardening to marble-like durability when exposed to air. Perfect for precision work. Descend into those quarries today. The air is cool. The silence is total. The same silence that filled these tunnels 3,000 years ago. Run your hand along the walls. Feel the ancient chisel marks. Somewhere in this darkness, 80,000 men spent years cutting stones by torchlight. Stones they would never see placed in the building above. Every mark they made was an act of faith in a plan they couldn't see. 7 years, $590 billion, 183,000 workers, millions of stones carved in darkness, assembled in silence. And finally, it was finished. But the construction was never the point. The real moment was still to come. The day of dedication arrived. All Israel gathered. Solomon stood before the massive bronze altar in the courtyard. The priests carried the Ark of the Covenant, Israel's most sacred object. The golden chest containing the tablets of the law, from the city of David where his father had housed it. They passed through the great doors. Through the holy place, walls covered in gold, floors covered in gold, cedar beams overlaid with gold. Into the Holy of Holies, the innermost room. A perfect cube of 20 cubits in each dimension, walls of gold. Under the wings of 2 golden cherubim, each 15 feet tall. They set the ark down. They withdrew. And then it happened. 2 Chronicles, chapter 5. Then the temple of the Lord was filled with the cloud, and the priests could not perform their service because of the cloud, for the glory of the Lord filled the temple of God. Not fog, not incense smoke. The Shekinah, the visible, tangible, overwhelming presence of the living God. It was so thick the priests couldn't stand. They fell to their knees. Some fell on their faces. The same men who had carried the ark, who had walked those gold-plated floors, now lay prostrate, unable to move. Think about what this moment meant. For 7 years, 183,000 people had worked in faith. They cut stones they would never see placed, They carried gold they would never touch again. They built a house for a God they couldn't see. And now, he showed up. The silence of construction gave way to the thunder of presence. Every sacrifice validated, every drop of sweat redeemed, every talent of gold justified. God moved in. Solomon, on his knees, prayed words recorded in 1 Kings chapter 8. But will God really dwell on earth? The heavens, even the highest heaven, cannot contain you. How much less this temple I have built? The heavens cannot contain him, and yet he came anyway. Solomon's temple was not just gold and cedar. It was faith made visible. 183,000 people building something they believed God would inhabit. And he did. But the story doesn't end with glory. The debt Solomon accumulated forced him to give 20 cities to King Hiram as payment. Hiram inspected them and called them Kabul, worthless. The forced labor Solomon imposed created resentment that split the kingdom within one generation. The most expensive building in history came with a price beyond gold. What Solomon built in 7 years stood for 373 years, until Babylon burned it to ashes. But the question it asked still echoes across millennia. What are you building that will outlast you? If you could ask King Solomon one question about this project, what would it be? Drop it in the comments.